Co-Opinions. My name is Josh, and today I have Mike.
Hello.
And Kara.
Hello.
So we're going to talk about the evolution of couch cooperative gaming. But before we get into that, let's talk about some little game news from the last week or so and things we've been playing. Mike, why don't you go first?
All right. Well, the main thing I've been playing is I kind of got back into Destiny 2 just slightly. They had another, their second DLC drop, and it has to do with the Warmind, and it's far more interesting than what else I've seen, and they fixed a lot of the issues that I had when they initially brought out the Born of Osiris. That really kind of broke the game for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say shout out to them. They've really listened to what people have been saying that they didn't like about the game, and they've been working to correct it. Within the confines of, obviously not just ripping it down and starting over. So I appreciate that. Is it enough to get me back into it? I don't really think so, at least not to the point where I was before. But I do appreciate that they're making an effort to correct a mistake.
So it was interesting. I saw somebody comment on Warmind just the other day, but it was in hashtag form, so I thought it was Warmind. Like, what? What? What am I even seeing here? So I actually also saw another article that said, are Destiny players getting angry too easily? Like, this screams pure clickbait. I'm not going to see what this says. But given how much all you guys complain about it, I wondered if maybe somebody else was onto it. I heard they've handled a lot of things really bad in that game.
In what sense would you say they've handled them poorly?
So mostly it was near the beginning. Didn't they change progression and they handled it very poorly?
Oh, yes. There was an issue with the way leveling happened. And
Okay.
We went into it before, and I could make an episode out of just that. But yes, they changed a lot of things that kind of nerfed things for the really hardcore players.
Mm-hmm.
It just kind of completely wrecked the game for them, which was a really odd turn for a company to make. Let's take all of our most dedicated fan base and kind of F them over. Like, what?
Boo.
Yeah. Just a misstep all the way around. And while they haven't really admitted it's a misstep directly, the changes they've made with Warmind, the changes they've made with the way the weapons are laid out, and they've addressed a lot of people's issues with the exotic weaponry not really feeling exotic. It was kind of just a purchase to look cool thing. And they've done a lot with retooling the exotic weaponry in order to actually make it like something really special.
Gotcha.
So I appreciate that.
All right. Anything else you've been playing?
Other than that, I tried that new mobile game, Hogwarts Mystery.
Now, before we get into that, only because, Kara, that's pretty much the only thing you've been playing, right?
It is, well, yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
Well, if I had been allowed to finish my statement before I was so
Sorry.
rudely interrupted, I was going to say I have been playing that, but I believe Kara was also going to talk about it quite a bit.
Hey, you never know. You never know. Was there any... Yeah, we'll go ahead and let you guys get into your Hogwarts free-to-play guilt simulator. Go for it.
Guilt simulator? What?
It is a guilt simulator.
Yeah, okay. Go.
Well, in the first... he says guilt simulator because at the very beginning of it, you go into a room and you start getting choked out and you're like, oh, instantly you run out of energy, so you're just going to wait choking here in a closet and feel bad about not being able to move forward and unchoke yourself unless you pay for it.
Wait. That's what everybody has been getting all huffy about?
So it's more the fact that for a game that is supposed to be targeted toward younger audiences...
Yeah,
I don't even say younger audiences because, I mean, yes, kids still read Harry Potter, but Harry Potter is very much a millennial.
But a lot of it is still targeted at a younger audience. So when somebody that you are made to have an attachment to is immediately put in a dire situation where the game tells you, give us money and you don't have to watch them suffer for so long, that's a legit hostage tactic right there.
I don't know. It didn't even, honestly, the reason why I asked it in that sense is that didn't even register to me.
I know.
I thought people were talking about something that happened much later in the game. Like, oh, it must get a lot darker because nothing dark has happened yet.
Well, and I know
freaking vanilla.
When I talked about that, you're like, whoa, spoilers. I'm like, isn't this like at the beginning of the game?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
It continues to do it throughout.
It's like the scene from Saving Private Ryan. Somebody's trying to push a knife into your chest and go, shh. Wait 45 minutes for more energy.
I'm a little concerned. You guys are talking about this game being specifically built to be a guilt generator, and I have felt zero guilt playing this game.
Well,
No, I didn't either. It's just how you can see how they've made it to target younger kids like that, because that's how mobile games always work in general, because they have their big fish that they go for and people that are going to continuously spend money. So those are the people that they're going to get in those scenarios. But if you, like you and me, who's not going to go into it knowing you're not going to really spend money on it, when I played that and got to that part of it, I was like, oh, okay, well, here, have fun in this closet while I go do other things. I felt zero guilt.
And that's actually an interesting topic, talking about mobile gaming tactics attempting to target the whales. That's something I'd like to touch on in a mini-sode at some point. But yeah, I see where Kira's coming from. Mike, you look contemplative here.
Oh, no, I just find the entire thing ridiculous. I think everyone's just gotten a little too fragile. I don't understand what anyone is talking about with this being a guilt machine. If you feel the need to lay down the money, you need to own that that's your thing.
Well, there was a Penny Arcade comic years ago at this point about League of Legends. We're like, wow, League of Legends is so good. It's so good, and it's so free. It's so free. Let's be honest. How much money have you spent? I spent $40,000. Because that's what they find, is that when people play these free games, they're like, well, just $2 here or there won't hurt it. And then they find, on average, people spend close to a full game's worth of money on these microtransactions, justifying it as, that's how much I would have spent on a normal game anyways. So the trade-off there for me is the fact that you probably aren't getting a gameplay's worth of payoff here, especially when the gameplay is most of the time click button to proceed. Now, I haven't played your Harry Potter Dance Mystery Party or whatever it is, so I don't know if there's actual gameplay
Did we
involved.
get to a dancing part? I'm excited.
And it's Hogwarts Mystery. This takes place 10 years before Harry Potter.
Okay, sorry. So, Harry Potter Conception Boogaloo, I don't know. Oh, that's 9 months, not 9 years.
You are the main character, not someone else, so that's why Harry is in it.
Who's the main character?
You are. Whoever you create.
It's
I'm about to say, I better not be in this game.
Yes.
Anyways. All right. Anything else about your Harry Potter Electric Boogaloo?
Why is everyone looking at me?
I
You were
don't
talking
know.
about it, Kara.
No, I mean, it's an enjoyable game. I like to play it in between. It's a good mix-up between my Pokemon Go, which was a struggle for me today.
Because
GoFest tickets went on sale, and I did not get them because the servers kept making me restart.
Kara
So
just dated
hopefully-
the episode, by the way. That's fine. I just have a crusade against dating the episode.
Not that anyone cares. And I believe I made a point of that in the episode where you got all huffy about dating the episode. So
Yeah.
I started recording myself saying the date and just splicing it into the episode.
Yeah, I know. It makes it so I actually have to pay attention while editing these now. Anyways, so how did that ticket buying process go?
You can't keep interrupting me and then just completely segueing what I have to say and then being like, and back.
Oh, I can. I'm going to keep doing it. Go ahead.
Well,
So buying tickets today was a struggle, which I'm trying to make myself feel better in that since the servers kept crashing and timing out and making me go back and restart my process, so I was in no queue, even though I started right when tickets went on sale. I'm making myself feel better telling me that their servers are going to have as much problems as last year, and I'm avoiding a mess.
Yeah, try to make yourself feel better that way.
Yeah,
How's that working?
just let me have it.
Got it. All right, anything else?
That's about it for me.
Okay. So I myself have been playing a few things. I played a game, Battle Chef Brigade. That's a cross between Iron Chef and Monster Hunter, which is fascinating because years ago I wanted this kind of game, but I didn't know how they would execute it. And lo and behold, Adult Swim Games published this Kickstarter game. And the idea behind it is that you are in these chef battles and you have to go out, kill a bunch of monsters, bring their ingredients back, and then do a match 3 mini game to create these different kind of dishes. So the ingredients you get the monsters from is the theme of the battle, and then the gem colors associated in each of the ingredients are what the different judges are looking for. So stuff from a dragon might have primarily red gems, whereas stuff from a ice beast might have primarily blue. So if you need to have mostly blue gems but dragon meat, then you have to mix and match your ingredients. I thought it was done really interestingly. The only downside I had was the switch in between the fighting and the cooking was really abrupt. And the story tried to play it safe by not making it too super involved, no huge bad guy, which would have been kind of difficult with the way they approached the story. I liked it a lot, beat it in like 10 hours, 11 hours. And I also picked up Needhog 2, which is the original Needhog is one of those games you guys stopped playing with me because I was insufferable.
We didn't stop playing. That's a good distinction. We didn't stop playing. We stopped playing with you. We all still happily played with each other. Well, it played Needhog with each other.
Anyways. Yeah, Needhog was one of those games. The only thing you had in it, to people who haven't played it, is it was a game where you had foils, and the idea was you could switch between low, medium, and high stance, and when you killed somebody, you progressed toward the right or left side of the screen, depending on which way you were going.
No, like, legit question.
Shoot.
What's a foil?
A foil is the fencing sword.
Oh, all right. I learned a thing.
You learned a thing. Anyways, in the first one, it was very basic, just pure gameplay. You could also kick or roll. But for the most part, it was focused on just being able to do the counters and very gameplay specific. In this game, they've added 3 new weapons, a dagger, a saber, and a bow and arrow, each with their own strengths and weaknesses. The saber can disarm people, but is slower. The dagger is really fast but short range, and the bow is slower but super long range, but very specific, really easy to block. I've only played one game online, but it was a crazy intense game. The person took me all the way to my edge of the screen, and then I managed to come back and take them 7 screens back for the win. It was a 7-minute round that we used up 6.5 minutes in. It was actually crazy fun. I wish I'd recorded it. That was a legit amazing payoff for that game. But I remember in the first game you guys stopped playing with me because I would beat the thing by just I would scoot along the ground and then jump over you
and hide in the weeds, and
I just keep rolling through the weeds. Jack, this isn't fun. I'm like, it is super fun for me. And then nobody wanted to play with me anymore. I'm like, come on, guys.
The Needhog is freaking gross.
Well, it got a lot grosser.
It gets even worse, and now you're not stick figures. So you're these gross.
You're like Homer Simpson. If Homer Simpson was a caveman. Disgusting.
Yeah, it's bad, and the Needhog is even more 3D,
so
and
gross.
I don't want to say realistic, but has a lot more definition.
But yeah, that's a good way to say it. It's kind of
not in a good way.
Yeah, no.
But it's a fun game.
It's crazy fun. I can't wait for you guys to actually play it with me. I also started up the game Iconoclasts, which is a Metroidvania type game. I believe it was a Kickstarter, but I'm not sure. Came out to very strong reviews. I'm surprised at the amount of religious references in it. Not like real world religious references, but this is a very brightly colored and upbeat sounding game. And within the first 20 minutes, a family gets executed for religious heresy. I was not expecting it to go in this direction. So
that's heavy.
Yeah, right off the bat. Wow.
This is what we're about.
I guess. And quick last little gaming news is Walmart Canada might have leaked a huge amount of E3 games. So if you want some E3 spoilers spoiled for you, maybe skip ahead about a minute. Because Canada, they listed Just Cause 4, a Splinter Cell game, Dragon Quest 2 for PS4, Lego DC Villains, Borderlands 3, Rage 2, Gears of War 5, Forza Horizons 5, and Assassin's Creed. Some of those are very surprising. Some of them aren't.
Did you say Forza Horizon 5?
That's what a reputable source has this.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, Borderlands 3 and Rage 2 are big surprises because Rage 2, the original, came out a long time ago, and Borderlands 3 has been in the hopper for quite a while.
That one jumped out at me too.
Yeah. Gears of War 5 is only surprising because we hadn't heard anything about it prior to this supposed leak. Are you checking my source over here?
No, I'm just excited for Dragon's Quest 2.
You're thinking
I
of
know, I'm
Dragon's
thinking
Crown.
Dragon's Crown. I'm always like, Dragon's Quest. Wait, no.
Fun fact, Dragon's Crown, the one we played on PS3, came out half a decade ago.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, right?
You're dating things.
Shh,
Yeah, talk about dating things too. This list coming out. Like
this list came out a while ago. How long ago?
Why are we talking about it?
Because came out since we recorded last.
Which will be even further since we recorded now when it's posted.
Silence. Anyways, thank you for that.
Date.
Moving on to our main topic, though, we are going to talk about how we witnessed the evolution of couch co-op, because for a lot of us in this particular age range, couch co-op is something that was a large influence on the earlier part of our lives and was conspicuously absent later, but we've kind of seen somewhat of a resurgence lately. But before we get into the specifics of it, for anybody who isn't entirely sure of what we mean when we say couch co-op, cooperative games, of course, are games that you play with other people. Some people are more familiar nowadays with your MMORPGs, like your World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy XIV you play online. Those are technically cooperative games. There are shooters like your Halos that you can play online. Some are also available to play on the couch. What we're talking about are games that you could play with other people locally, so known as local co-op or couch co-op. We all got started around the Nintendo era of playing couch co-op, but the real genesis of couch co-op comes back in the early days of console gaming, back when the only machines that were strong enough to do this were your arcade machines, which is a fascinating idea to me, that arcade machines could be stronger than home consoles. Just how novel it is. So the idea that you could only play games with other people cooperatively at the same time, usually your brawlers like your Double Dragon or TMNT, those were the ones that you played at the arcade. And when they wanted to bring something like that to the home system, most of the time it was just ports of arcade games. In fact, I think we looked it up. One of the earliest home co-op games was Double Dragon.
Actually, a note about the original Double Dragon was that when they ported it to the home console, it lost its co-op ability because of the fact that the home console was not strong enough. Double Dragon 2, I believe, that was the first one that was ported that had co-op. Please do check me on that. Not 100%, but I feel like that's right. I feel it in my guts.
It does just say Double Dragon on here, so I don't know.
Maybe. All right. I might be off. Wouldn't be the first time.
Oh, yeah. Double Dragon 2 and 3 did retain co-op gameplay. Look at that.
Boom.
Point to Mike.
Holy crap.
So anyways, there were some games that were console specific, like River City Ransom. Only those were on consoles. And some games were actually more successful on console as co-op, like Contra. That was in arcades, but actually did much better on the Nintendo Entertainment System than it did in arcades.
Well, that's because it took so long. It was so hard that you didn't have to keep putting in quarter after quarter. You could actually just sit there and try and get through the game.
What was crazy about Contra is that game's only like 15 minutes long. You just remember it being way longer because of how much you died.
Well, yeah, okay. If you can get through it without dying, it's 15 minutes long. But for most people, the game is much longer.
And you did see that, and we're focusing more on the co-op aspect here than the arcade aspect. But a lot of those games that started as arcade games, they retained their arcade difficulty, which meant they were stupid hard. So, like your Contras.
Again, the early days of just wanting your money.
Well, and that's the other thing that was a tactic used by early Nintendo games. Have you heard the game term Nintendo Hard?
No.
The idea behind it is that Nintendo games were intentionally more difficult because they knew they could only fit kilobytes of information on the cartridge. So they intentionally made them so they could be super hard in the tail end, so you would die and have to go all the way to the beginning, because if you were super good at it, Nintendo games were never more than like a few hours long. So they had to make them hard to artificially extend the gameplay. Like Dragon Quest, where you had to grind a whole bunch. Wasn't a long game, just had to grind a lot.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's clever.
Mm-hmm.
Having to work with limited resources.
Yeah, you work with the tools you got. But anyways, now that we have some context for the idea of couch co-op, where it came from, and where we generally got the intro points. Let's nail down the specifics here. What were some of the first couch co-op games you guys could remember playing?
Well, before we get super into it, I'd like to point out that we're also eliminating competitive out of this aspect and just focusing. I know we said cooperative, but you started talking by multiplayer and just making sure that distinction between we're actually talking about only cooperative gameplay. And also, there was a lot of the early days because of space and memory that you were talking about. It was you took turns one at a time, so there wasn't there was a long period where it was one person playing and then it was player two's time, like the original Mario and things like that.
That is an important distinction.
Kind of going around to what was my original game, which was one of the first multiplayer, or what?
I believe the term for that is asynchronous multiplayer.
Now, that I would only disagree on because asynchronous multiplayer has taken on a different connotation nowadays. Asynchronous multiplayer nowadays is when somebody does a thing that impacts how the next person's game goes. So, like in the current Assassin's Creed game, you can perform asynchronous multiplayer by helping somebody out in their game because they dropped a marker. So,
all right, I see what you're saying.
Right.
Kind of like how you could go into Fables.
Yeah, kind of like...
But that was online. Mm-hmm. Online, you could go into other people's Fable game and help them out, but it didn't really help you out.
Kinda. But yes, you bring up a valid point. We're not focusing on the competitive because that'll rule out your Mario Karts, your Smash Brothers, basically any fighter game, any racing game, just because you competed in those games. Now, there are places you could co-op.
I was going to say, the one exception that I can remember speaking to some of my earlier co-op experiences was Need for Speed Hot Pursuit. That game, there was a racing aspect where you could play cooperatively because you were together running away from the police. So there were certain exceptions where you could actually do cooperative play inside of those competitive games.
Interesting. So anyways, discounting competitive games and discounting games where you took turns, like a lot of early Nintendo games that Kara pointed out, which would you guys consider to be some of your earlier couch co-op experiences?
I think my biggest first one was another arcade game that was ported to home system, and that was Bubble Bobble. Someone over here isn't a fan and doesn't like to play a whole lot. But that was a lot of fun for me. The hardest part, I think, of that game was that you played as a multiplayer. And, even if you could go through it all by yourself. It had 100 levels that were quick levels where you had enemies that came up. You would blow a bubble. You would trap them in a bubble and pop it before they could get angry and escape. And when you cleared all the enemies, you went to the next stage. So when you got to the 100th level, if you did it solo, it said, great, now come back and beat it with a friend. And the problem with that was even if you went through every level with a friend and didn't use any of the cheat codes and didn't skip to other levels, you went through the whole thing with a friend, you both also had to survive at the end against the boss. So even if you played it together, you both also had to survive because you're brothers and you couldn't just leave one girlfriend sad there alone. Which it was also one of the first games to have multiple endings, especially in that range. Josh is over here doing air quotes for the multiple endings, but again, given the memory and what they had and being, just now starting to bring multiplayer to the home console, I think it was an inventive idea. And so you would essentially beat it with 2 players. It would then give you a code to unlock super mode where you could do those 100 levels again with faster, harder enemies. And then you got another ending where that you saved your girlfriends and your parent. It turns out the big boss were your parents that had been turned into a monster, so you get reunited with your girlfriends and your parents. So
wow, there's some deep bubble lore here.
Yeah.
So that was definitely a more involved experience than I was anticipating.
Never quite got all through that because a lot of my friends don't like Bubble Bobble.
I mean, it's got like 45 seconds of catchy song and that's it. Just repeated for 100 levels. Well,
you can also, like a lot of old Nintendo games, I feel like you could just turn the music down and play your own music.
Yeah, I like slow jams on my Bubble Bobble.
Listen to some Seal.
Kiss from a rose. Do. Anyways, Mike.
I need a minute.
Okay.
No, so my first co-op experience, big time co-op experience, because we talked before actually during my interview where I didn't actually have a home system until the N64, so I had small experiences with games going over to friends' houses visiting family. But our big system was the N64, and the game was Rainbow Six. It was the one game where, again, referring to my interview, my brothers and I, we were generally fairly competitive. This was the one game where we really worked well together. The tactical FPS, as I would call it, was really great for us because you had to... Everything was about coordination. So once you found your rhythm, you were great, and it felt really awesome to pull it off. You know, everybody gets lined up, so you've got your eyesights on everybody, but you're not going to fire yet. You're looking through the windows on all your enemies, and then on the count of 3, 3, 2, 1, fire, and everybody drops. It feels awesome. So that was really great for us. It was a game that we could play that was not so competitive, so we had a common goal, which was nice. We didn't not nearly as many fights. So that's my first experience was Rainbow Six.
Now, my first experience was mostly on the Nintendo, and I have a brother, so they tried to get us co-op games where we could, but the problem with those early Nintendo games is there was really only like 2 kinds of co-op games. Either you shot stuff or you beat people up. And for the most part, it was shoot stuff. And I remember because we were every bit of 8 years old, there was a game called Cabal, I think it was. The idea was you basically hid behind cover, and when you weren't hiding behind you were running in between cover, and you were shooting enemies in the background. And then once you finished shooting the enemies in the background, this is what we focused on. You ran out down the field like you just got off a horse because your legs were super wide, and you could see their little butt cheeks bounce up and down. And me and my brother are like, they're doing the butt thing! That's what we focused on, because, again, not even 10 years old. But a lot of the games like Ikari Warriors, go up the screen, shoot a bunch of stuff. Like they were all very similar games back then. I know there was one game, there were these black cartridges, and this just came to mind, otherwise I would have looked it up. And the idea was that some aliens had invaded. It was basically a rip on Alien, now that I say it out loud. You play as 2 people trying to fight off this alien invasion. The strongest weapon was the flamethrower. I was, again, less than 10, so I didn't realize how big of a rip on Alien this was. But it definitely was. And yeah, there really wasn't a lot of variety in the kinds of co-op games you had back then. But again, limitations of the hardware. I just thought the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2 was the coolest thing. So I didn't question it that Streets of Rage, TMNT, and was the third one, completely blanking on it right now, River City Ransom. They're all just variations on beat-em-up games. And since it was an early system, not a ton of variation. River City Ransom did have RPG elements, which was unique. But since they weren't necessary, you could get through that game in like 8 minutes. Anyways, so Mike, you touched on something that I'd like to segue now. How we watched as the systems got more advanced, how they started introducing more complex co-op. And in the early systems, while they did have multiple controller ports, for the most part it was for the sake of appearances. You had some games like Tetris where you could use multiple controller ports, but a lot of them didn't facilitate you working toward a common goal at the same time, which is something as the hardware got stronger, it was easier to do. So me and Kara both named Nintendo games, but you named an N64 game.
Yep.
And we did some research, and there's not a ton of cooperative N64 games we could find.
No, I think it dates back to what I was talking about earlier with the whole, a lot of them had where you could play the game cooperatively, even though that wasn't necessarily the goal. Like in versus modes, you could be on a team and play against the AI, technically cooperatively, but it is just a competitive mode that you happen to be playing that way. So I don't know where you would draw the line there.
Oh, one thing we should bring up, only because these are games we don't typically play, is sports games. A lot of sports games did support cooperative play.
Yes,
but
they did.
We mostly don't play those.
Yeah, it wasn't nearly as much fun back then. We got out of it around the GameCube era. I think it was like NFL Blitz 2000 or something. Was the last one I can remember playing. And the AI just wasn't strong enough back then. So if all the players were on the same team, you just demolished them no matter what the setting was.
Gotcha.
So you really had to play against each other for the game to be any fun.
Makes sense. But anyways, as far as how the hardware progressing allowed us to have more interesting cooperative experiences, I know one of the first examples was the fact, have either of you heard of the game Secret of Mana?
Only in reference to times you've brought it up.
Got it. Yeah. So the Super Nintendo game Secret of Mana was a top-down RPG, not dissimilar to other real-time action RPGs. But what was unique about it was within the first couple hours of gameplay, two extra party members were added. Now this game was playable solo, but you could actually get a port expansion. So you could plug more controllers in. And you could actually play 3-player co-op on this Super Nintendo game. That was unheard of for me. The limitations were there because you had to all move in the same direction. You couldn't go off screen from each other. I found it to be cumbersome, but the fact that you could play a 3-player action RPG at the same time, that was incredible to me. And that was something that was previously unheard of. Now, there are some places where it didn't work out super well because even though it was a action RPG, still an RPG. If you want to use a spell, somebody has to pause the game, bring up their spell wheel, select a spell, select who it's going to target, then you have your 5-second animation, and then everybody else starts attacking again. But hey, 3 people at once, that's cool, right?
Technology is now.
Technology.
Yeah. I suppose if we are discussing technologies now, we should mention there were a lot of AKA couch co-op games that you could play on the PC, like your Carmen Sandiego trivia games and things like that. I can remember around the same time as the N64, if we would go over to my friend Josh's house, not this Josh, different Josh, I just realized that. We would go over and sit in the back room where they had his family computer set up, and we would play Carmen Sandiego or Zoombinis for hours on end.
This game called Zoombinis.
I did not make this game up. Somebody out there in the ether that is listening to this podcast, please, back me up here. Zoombinis was a real thing. They were these little, blue Gumby guys, then you had to solve the puzzles to get them from one side of the island to the other. And for being 8, 9 years old, it was tons of fun. So there were PC options as well. Although I didn't like the whole, when you were playing co-op, you had, your WS, I can't even freaking remember how you moved. You had the arrow keys. And
WASD.
WASD, thank you. Somebody had to use WASD to move and somebody got the arrow keys. I hated being the one on the WASD.
A Zoombinis game came out in 2015.
Nope, it's older than that.
No, the first one came out in 96.
There it is.
But apparently one came out 3 years ago.
Oh, look at that.
You can relive your childhood.
Huh.
I doubt it holds up.
Logical Journey of the Zoombinis, Zoombinis Mountain Rescue, Zoombinis Island Odyssey. And then I guess 13 years later they released something? Oh, it was educational, you nerd.
Well, yeah.
Okay. Anyways, so any other bits on?
No, not really. Yeah, no.
So I know that with the Super Nintendo and the Genesis, I felt like we saw a lot more of those cooperative games that you could play. For example, Sonic introduced a cooperative aspect, which is weirdly overlooked by a lot of people. Sonic 2 introduced the ability to play as Tails as well. I thought it was funny because Kara was asking earlier, she couldn't find anywhere where you could play as Sonic and Knuckles at the same time. I'm like, that's not how that works at all.
That was just a quick little brain fart. It's been a long day.
Valid. But I just thought that was humorous. Fun trivia about that. There is a meme of putting and Knuckles after everything. So you can look up blank and Knuckles. And so in Sonic Mania, they brought this to the logical conclusion where there's and Knuckles mode. So you can have Sonic and Knuckles, and both of them are in the game. Sonic and Tails and Knuckles, and Tails and Knuckles, and the final end of this meme, Knuckles and Knuckles mode, where if you beat the game in Knuckles and Knuckles mode, the ending is Knuckles reading a story to all the island critters that says Sonic Mania and Knuckles, and it shows Sonic and Tails in the background looking confused. Like, all right, you guys owned it till the end. I respect that. But anyways, to get off that tangent, in Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo, we saw a lot. Like, that's where your Streets of Rage really became popular. I feel like we saw a lot more beat-em-ups. Battletoads, well, it was on the NES. There was Super Double Dragon and Super Battletoads. A lot closer ports to the arcade could now be brought to the home console. And I felt like we saw expanded versions of that as well. Like, I think we might be moving on to like the PS1 at this point, but Metal Slug, that was a prolific cooperative game in the arcades. And when they brought it to the home console, they actually created Metal Slug 5 and 6, which were only available on the home console. I actually have the anthology for the PS4. And these were games that were great for co-op because there weren't a lot of fail states. Well, you couldn't kill each other. There were tons of fail states. But as we felt the technology start to progress, I really feel like they tried to expand what they could do with the co-op games. So what I want to move on to now is in the last couple of generations, be it the PS3 and PS4, what have you noticed with the evolution of couch co-op? Because the quick note I'd like to make was something interesting I found while researching was when the PS3 came out, they talked about how it could support several controllers, way more than 4. I'm like, wow, when that was announced, I thought, that's going to be amazing. Think of how many people you can have playing on the same system. And then instead of going with, because they no longer had the controller port limitations, but then they decided to focus more on the online, which makes sense because it means you don't have to put as much strain on one system. You can distribute it across a dedicated server with everybody just plugging in with their client.
I would argue that point right there that you're speaking of, the PS3 360 point, that was kind of the golden era for couch co-op because that's right when you were starting to get online. They were starting to figure it out, and they were kind of blending the two. So you could, a lot of the games from around that time period, you could play, 2 people locally and online with other people, which I thought was kind of the perfect blend of the two worlds before you stepped off into online only when they kind of let couch co-op go. So I would definitely call that the golden era, right around, your Halo 2, Halo 3, Gears.
So Gears was a great example because Gears is a game that just thrived on broiness, which drove Kara up the wall. Well, I think
Horde mode drove me up the wall.
Horde mode!
But how do you really feel, Mike?
Every man's reaction.
Yeah, pretty much.
Well, I mean, it was so great that they kind of, every other big game from the time kind of aped it because they added zombie Nazis to World at War, the Call of Duty game that came out about the same time. And then they kept that along. And then starting with Halo 3, I believe it was, they added Firefight, which was just the same thing as Horde mode. It was just you played as a team against waves of enemies rolling in.
Right.
So, I mean, yes, that does seem to annoy some people, but it was hugely popular. And it's because it was a ton of fun.
Oh, this is jumping back a little bit, and I apologize. Did either of you guys ever play Toe Jam and Earl on Genesis?
No.
Though that's a game I think both of you would love tremendously because you played as the eponymous. Did I say that? Eponymous?
Yes.
Okay. Toe Jam.
Hip Hop Anonymous?
God. You played as Toe Jam and Earl, and this game was so beautifully early 90s because they were aliens from the planet Funkatron. One of them had a big gold medallion and a backwards hat. The other one wore oversized capris and sunglasses. And as you were going on your way, I don't know if it was from or to Funkatron, you crashed your ship on some Earth-like planet, and you had to progress through these successive levels that you took elevators up to, and you had to avoid Earthlings, which included Santa Claus, who could give you terrible presents, like rabid, roaming bands of people, aggressive vacuum cleaners, and in the level 0 you could drop into, you could get into a hot tub with a bunch of bikini babes. It was so amazingly 90s, and you had to collect all the different pieces of your ship to get back to Funkatron.
Honestly, it's so 90s. I know exactly what you're talking about, and I've seen bits and pieces of it back in the day. I think I might have played tiny parts, and I'm a pretty outlandish person, and for me to think that was too outrageously 90s at the time, even as a child, like that has to speak volumes.
Oh man, I couldn't have loved it more. It was so good. I kind of want to go back and play it some more after this.
You lost me at Planet Funkatron.
No, the best.
You mean from the beginning?
Yeah, from the very beginning. Before we get too into the online aspect of how this went back and forth, there were some interesting ideas that I thought you had before like Xbox and PS2 really started ramping up. And I feel like you saw, and I'm not sure how much of this you guys played, there were some innovative ideas with like the GameCube. Do you remember the Game Boy Advance tuner or connector cable, whatever you called it?
Oh, yeah, I remember you could connect your Advance to the GameCube. And isn't that how you played, was it Four Swords?
Four Swords Adventures.
Four Swords Adventures.
Did you? You probably never had that, did you, Kara?
I did not.
Unfortunately, I have to call that a novelty because it was an awesome idea, but it was so very specific. I can only think of a couple three Nintendo games that used the Game Boy Connect link cable like that, and only 2 of them used it in a multiplayer aspect. One of those 2 games was Four Swords Adventures, where anytime you would go into a building, you would all have to look down at your Game Boy because the interior map of every level was broadcast on your Game Boy. So when people would go into the building, it would allow them to have the main screen up on the TV while the interior was down on the bottom screen. So you could just see people looking up and down and up and down. And the best part, and I think I may have mentioned this in the Zelda episode many moons ago, is if there was ever a hazard that required everybody to run inside real fast, you could watch everybody look down at their Game Boy at the exact same time when they ran into a building. And I just thought that was a really interesting way to try and keep co-op fresh. Because I'm sitting here and I'm looking through all these different co-op games that were available locally, and so many of them are just either shooters or brawlers. Which isn't bad. A well-executed shooter or brawler like Time Splitters. That was a unique shooter. Or Golden Axe. That's a classic brawler. But it's still kind of just the same games. And again, not to get too divisive here, but you didn't see a ton of innovation.
Well, for PS2, you did see the dawn of the Lego era within the Indiana Jones. So there's that, which at the time I think was very innovative. At this point, it's beating a dead horse. But at the beginning with that, it introduced 2-player. I think I could be wrong with this, but I think that also included like the dynamic. I don't even know how you say that.
The split screen.
The dynamic split screen.
The dynamic split screen. Apart. Yeah, it goes.
That was really cool.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that one included it, but that is something that I think Lego really started utilizing, and it had a lot of puzzles where you could do solo or work together. I think that was a very creative early on co-op game.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And like you said, they have since they have also introduced the idea that you don't have to do the dynamic split screen. I'm not sure if that was an option at the beginning. You could just keep it static, one on the left, one on the right.
If you wanted to.
Yeah, which is, it gets really nice. I mean, it's nice having the dynamic, and especially back in the day, it was really cool to see that kind of technology. But once you start doing your own puzzles and start running in a bunch of different directions, you're like, okay, stop pulling me in other directions. I just want my camera to stay straight.
Well, another genre that came out in approximately the PS2, Xbox 360, etc. I'm sure they existed before this, but I feel like Dynasty Warriors really started coming to its own. And
yes,
those
definitely.
are called Muso games, I think. The idea is you're one crazy powerful character that takes out just hundreds of people.
Waves upon waves.
Waves upon waves. The one you'd be familiar with, Kara, is Hyrule Warriors.
Yes.
So...
Did you play the Gundam one?
I did not play the Gundam one because that's
so
not my
fun.
jam, but I think Brent did, and I think he loved it.
I would like to think so.
Probably. But those were games that I thought were really interesting to do co-op, especially when they were smart enough to, like, they had your map and they said, there's an objective that needs to be done here. Somebody could say, I'll go take care of this objective. So it was kind of like strategy mixed with a brawler at the same time. So that was really cool. And that's something that couldn't have been done on an older system because you would legit kill in the hundreds of enemies in these. I know in Hyrule Warriors, you would take out just dozens of moblins at once. It was awesome. Kind of want to rebuy Hyrule Warriors on the Switch.
That game was a lot of fun, and Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance was a lot of the same way.
Yeah, that's on YouTube.
And during that period was, I only ever got to play that. I know it has co-op. I only ever got to play that one solo at that point, but I could see that one being a lot of fun as co-op at that point too, because that's just destroy everything.
Let's take this opportunity to move more into the online specific version and how that started affecting co-op. Because it did some good in that it allowed for a ton of people to connect to games, but it also kind of created the problem where local co-ops started to die off for a bit.
Well, I think not getting directly into that, another thing that I did that was really important was because you could split where all the players were plugged in, you could split the load.
Right.
So the game could be a lot more immersive and a lot bigger. That's what allowed you to create those big areas for like Horde mode and Gears. You couldn't have done that on a single system back then. That's just too much to have running. But because they could split it, and they had some of it running on a server, running on your system, running on their system, they could split the load everywhere. It ran beautifully, and you were able to get a lot bigger maps, and you were able to get a lot more immersive with your co-op gameplay.
But it did create some problems with, like, for example, though it wouldn't have worked the same way, Dead Space 3, you could only play that online co-op, which was problematic when you had people who lived in the same house who wanted to play the game together. You kind of had to make your own couch co-op, which this will be honorable mention because I think everybody did this at some point.
Dude, that's basically just a LAN party.
Yeah, it's...
Yeah, and I think the lull, the online, dawning of online and what it became really created a lull in couch co-op, and that's where a lot of the LAN parties and different things came in, or really just wanting to play the same thing. And at this point, I feel like that trend has continued on, but it kind of makes me sad because at this point, TVs are so big. You know, a lot of games say that they did it that way, so that way you didn't have, they wanted you to feel immersed. So you wanted to be able to have the full screen and not be missing things on the screen because it was split so someone else could have theirs or whatever. At this point, TVs are so big that I wish that wasn't such a reliancy.
I will say one thing that I think the Switch kind of leads to, or at least I hope it leads to, kind of speaking where we hope to see things moving forward, is that they kind of brought that back a little bit. I mean, that was one of their marketing points, I remember in their advertising, was that, you could take the two controllers off and you could play together.
Oh, yeah.
So they're kind of bringing that back around again. It's kind of, you see they talk about it in any kind of evolution when you're watching it from a business sense of the fourth wave, where you've moved so far away from it that it kind of becomes a novelty, so it kind of comes back around again. So I'm kind of hoping that we're moving in that direction and we're going to see people getting really innovative with couch co-op options because we've seen that lull now, and now they can get interesting with it.
Well, and you have actually kind of seen a resurgence in that. For example, although at this point the game is definitely over half a decade old, there is a Metroidvania game, Guacamelee. Mike, have you heard of it?
Oh, yeah. I remember you hyping it big time.
I have beaten that game 5 times, I think. I'm so stoked for the second one. Kara, you might have watched me beat it one time. That was a game where you could have drop-in, drop-out co-op, where it was just an action Metroidvania game, and it was really interesting to play co-op because it didn't negatively affect you in any way, shape, or form. And I can't say it brought a lot to it, but it was just fun to play an action game with somebody else. Now, it could get problematic in certain parts because to 100% that game, there was some intense platforming sections, just savagely difficult. And I know when I co-opted with frequent contributor to the show, Nick, and he had to drop out while I did certain parts of it just because there were like one-hit deaths. Like, this sucks.
That is something else that I enjoyed about couch co-op that you don't see so much anymore, is being able to pull a less abled friend forward. I remember that happening in Halo 3 a lot when one of us, not me, would get stuck. And I'd be like, all right, just stay where you are. I'm just going to run forward, and you'll zap forward to me when I load into the next screen. Yes, it was because it was a limitation of the system. They couldn't keep the two areas loaded at the same time. But it was kind of nice because you didn't have the frustration of having to wait 10 minutes while this guy figured out how to do the maze. It's like, just stay there and I'll warp you forward.
Well, and I think Mario did a good job of that when when the later Nintendo games came out and you could bubble yourself There's different ones when you were playing cooperatively all together on the same screen, and because you could press the minus button and it would put you in a bubble and you could just bubble up to the next person.
This was actually a criticism I have some people I would play this with. It was New Super Mario Brothers Wii, the first Mario Brothers game you could truly play co-op up to 4 people at the same time. Brent, I'm just going to straight up call him out on this.
Not even here, calling him out.
Yeah. Brent was not great at certain aspects of this. So he would just bubble and float along the whole time. It's like, what? What are you even doing? Just watch the game if you're just going to float there.
Which was also terrible because at some points, too, if you wouldn't let someone know you were going to do it, they'd be making a really hard jump or doing something else, and you would be like, I'm going to catch up to you and bubble at the same time, and they'd jump and die and flip out, start the level over. You'd both die at the same time. If the person dies and you're bubbled, then you're just dead. So you have to start back.
Oh, so you can't get out of the bubble yourself?
Nope.
Gotcha, okay.
So that's how they balance that. Kind of like how in Rayman Origins, when you die, you become inflated, and the only way you can... Rayman Origins and Legends, the only way you can deflate is another character has to smack you, and that deflates you.
And I think bringing into that game, I think that's a great way to work it, being able to come back like that and things like that. Whereas if you go into the newer Donkey Kong countries, or Donkey Kong games...
The Donkey Kong games are kind of difficult to balance.
Well, yeah. When you go into the Donkey Kong games, you share all of your lives are balloons, and they're shared, which is even worse. You can't even keep your own number of lives. So if you're playing with... Especially it makes it bad if you're a parent and wanting to play with your own kids. You can't keep, things like Mario where you can bubble and keep them alive. It kind of keeps the fun and the game going. But if you're just playing with someone who can't keep up, then they just wasted all of your lives and on maybe the first level.
That is a criticism that I will give when Donkey Kong Country got brought back by Retro, I believe, because there hadn't been a Donkey Kong Country game since 64. For the Wii, they announced Donkey Kong Country Returns for the Wii, and it wasn't well designed for 2-player. For example, there would be portions where ledges would fall away. The problem is, if you have 2 people there, somebody's got to be behind the other one. So if these ledges fall away instantly, somebody's going to just keep dying instantly. Now, they tried to balance it a little bit by the fact that you could piggyback on the other character's back. The downside there is that you are now handicapping yourself for no particular reason.
Because you still lose 2 balloons.
If you die. Now, I believe, and I could be wrong, if you had the 2 players playing at the same time, if one was piggybacked on the other, there were some benefits you got, like you got to use Diddy Kong's jetpack if he was on your back, and I think you got to use his peanut shooter guns, but the trade-off just wasn't there for me. However, it's exactly like that, so bop. Anyways,
it's really good,
right? The second game, Tropical Freeze, that came out on the Wii U and is being re-released on the Switch, that game actually balanced the co-op way, way better. There was no more of that cheap one person has to take point. It was much better balanced, and actually it got great reviews when it came out. It's getting great reviews being re-released, so that's another game I'd consider buying if I hadn't beaten it twice, once with Kara and once with Nick. But we are rapidly approaching the end of our program. So what direction are you guys hoping with this semi-renaissance we're seeing? Because we completely glossed over it, but games like they brought Bomberman back. That's a game that excels at multiplayer because you don't have to split the screen to have multiple people. There's a game called Overcooked where you don't have to split the screen for multiple people. The game is actually partially about competing for the space to work toward a common goal. I think they're finding innovative ways that they can use cooperative in a different environment.
Well, and I think, you had brought up having them, having where you could have 6 controllers, and it was so amazing. And like Mike had brought up, the Switch is starting to do a lot of things, try and make it more portable, get more players going on. But one aspect that they, I think, is going to become a big part of it, and where I think it's going is mobile. And they've kind of done this a little bit with like the Jackpack Party party packs where you don't have to, your phone is your controller. So you all go in and sign in and go into the room and play your games like that. And they did the Jack trivia games, but then they also did other ones where you work together to defuse a bomb, a bunch of different ones. And I think that's where a lot of it's going to go, taking on your phones and tablets and correlating them into your gaming systems.
Mike?
Actually, to piggyback off of that, mostly I kind of see the same thing happening. We're already seeing where it's becoming the world of technology. Like all of your things are interconnected.
Oh, Internet of Things.
The Internet of Things. Thank you. I couldn't come up with that term. So we're already seeing that come together. We're seeing it in our gaming. You have your Pokemon Go, where technically, yes, everyone is on their own system, but you can really only play it when you're physically together for parts of it, like raids. You have to physically be in the same location. You meet people. So you're kind of seeing these different things being brought together. You already mentioned the fact that we're seeing them find innovative and new ways to use co-ops, since we've seen that lull, and we're kind of moving back into that area again. So that looks like a lot of fun. That's going to be cool. I like the fact that they're bringing forward the mobile gaming and adding in more of what we saw from the golden era, where you can use online to make local gameplay better. So I'm hoping to see a lot more of that moving forward, because I do enjoy being physically with other people when you're playing, because there's that force of presence that you don't get when you're playing just online, but you're actually sitting at home by yourself in your underwear.
I mean, I'll sit with buddies in my underwear too. I mean, the underwear thing is not a deal breaker here. I personally think that between the Switch and mobile gaming forcing some more innovative ideas when it comes to co-op, in addition to, I feel like there's been more indie games coming out with a focus on unusual multiplayer aspects. One that I would consider asynchronous would be like the Friday the 13th game. That's asynchronous, but it's not couch co-op. The idea is that one player plays as Jason and the rest plays teenagers trying to either kill or get away from Jason. I think that a lot of independent people are trying to force new ideas, as well as certain console developers. And like a game recently came out called A Way Out. Have you heard of it?
Mm-mm.
The first third of it's basically cooperative Shawshank Redemption. You're trying to break out of prison with one of your partners in like the 50s.
So much butt rape.
Well, luckily there's not actually any of that going on. However, you do carve out an escape tunnel behind your toilet, and you have to like break through when the thunder's going. So just straight up, you find out one of your characters is in prison for embezzlement. Like it's just straight up Shawshank Redemption.
No shame.
Nah, just I'm surprised they were. His name is Dandy Dufresne.
Tall glass of water.
Yeah, a medium glass of cool water. Anyways.
Morgan Freeman's not bad, actually.
Yeah, I tried. I think it shows up better on the microphone than it does. Anyways, so I think it's actually forcing them to consider the actual cooperative aspect of this. Because some games try to find a way to mesh it in, some better than others. For example, like Splinter Cell, sometimes that works. Fable included it. That was okay, kind of, not really, sort of. And other games do it really, really well. Like A Way Out has to be cooperative. Portal 2 did it fairly well. The puzzles were kind of hit or miss, and somebody could strong arm you. We talked about this in a previous episode. I don't know who would strong arm. It's crazy. But anyways, I'm thinking that the pressure is going to start coming back around with a strangely strong group vibe that we have going on right now.
I definitely think that. I mean, like everything, not just in gaming, but I feel like that's the vibe of everything right now. Being a part of something, being a part of community, getting people out, getting people together. I mean, and using all of the things we've created up until this point to branch it out. Like I said, with the mobile and everything else, and like with the Pokemon Go and getting people out together literally in groups. I think we're going to, and the fact that we have internet almost everywhere, it starts making a lot more possibilities limit.
All right. Anything else from you, Mike? I think that's pretty succinct to me.
Yeah, I was going to say that covers it, yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. All right. Well, that being said, Kara, thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Mike, thank you very much for coming on and editing this.
Sure thing.
So what is your favorite couch co-op game? Do you think couch co-op is a dead genre and should stay dead? Do you think that there are some gems that we failed to recognize? If so, let us know. But until next time, my name is Josh, and this is Co Opinions.